Defense Updates has reached more than 150,000 subscribers. We're genuinely thankful to our viewers. You keep us going. We don't dilute your video watching experience in this channel with sponsored products. If you like what we're doing, kindly support us at Patreon. www.patreon.com/defenseupdates. Their army's equipment and strategy were outmoded. Their air force's bombs and missiles were more dumb than smart. Their navy was more rust than ready. For decades, this was Western military leaders' view of their Russian counterparts. What they've seen in Syria and the Ukraine has come as a shock. Russian military jets have at times carried out more sorties in a day in Syria than the US-led coalition has done in a month. The Russian Navy has launched ballistic missiles from the Caspian Sea 900 miles away and kept supply lines going to Syria. The air defenses installed by the Russians in Syria and eastern Ukraine would make it extremely hazardous for the West to carry out strikes against the Assad regime or Ukrainian separatists. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the commander of the US Army in Europe, has described Russian advances in electronic warfare in Syria and Ukraine, a field in which they were typically supposed to be backward, as eye-watering. In this video, Defense Updates looks at how Putin's Russia has sidelined the US and NATO in Syria with its military might.
Number 5.
The unrest in Syria, part of a wider wave of 2011 Arab Spring protests, grew out of discontent with the Assad government and escalated to an armed conflict after protests calling for his removal were violently suppressed. Syrian opposition groups formed the Free Syrian Army (FSA) and seized control of the area surrounding Aleppo and parts of southern Syria. Over time, some factions of the Syrian opposition split from their original moderate position to pursue an Islamist vision for Syria, joining groups such as al-Nusra Front and ISIL. Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah support the Syrian government militarily, while beginning in 2014, a coalition of NATO countries began launching airstrikes against ISIL. International organizations have accused the Syrian government, ISIL, and rebel groups of severe human rights violations and of many massacres. US leaders have called for the removal of Assad. Hillary Clinton, as US Secretary of State in 2011, said, "The world will not waver, Assad must go." Obama, as US President in 2015, said, "Assad must go." Trump, as US President, "Assad won't get away with horrible crimes." Mr. Putin had other ideas.
Number 4.
The Russian military intervention in the Syrian civil war began in September of 2015, after an official request by the Syrian government for military help against rebel and jihadist groups. The intervention initially consisted of airstrikes fired by Russian aircraft stationed in the Khmeimim base at targets primarily in northwestern Syria, against military groups opposed to the Syrian government, including Syrian National Coalition, the Islamic State of Iraq, and the Levant, ISIL, al-Nusra Front, al-Qaeda in the Levant. Besides, Russian military advisors and special operations forces were stationed in Syria. Prior to the intervention, Russian involvement in the Syrian civil war had mainly consisted of supplying the Syrian army. Shortly after the operation began, Russian officials were cited as saying that, apart from fighting terrorist organizations, a broader geopolitical objective being to roll back US influence.
Number 3.
Russian forces in Syria were reported to have used a mix of precision-guided munitions and unguided weapons. The October 2015 airstrikes were Russia's first operational use of precision-guided munitions, whose development in Russia lagged behind other nations due to economic instability in the 1990s. The majority of weapons employed, however, were unguided. Most Russian jets employ the SVP-24 guidance system, which allows them to use unguided munitions with high precision, close to the precision of guided ones with substantially smaller costs. US Navy had maintained the distinction of being the only Navy to launch long-range cruise missiles from surface ships at land targets in combat, but that's changed. On October 7, 2015, Russian Navy entered the very short list when it used 3-meter 14 caliber in Syria. It has capabilities similar to the American Tomahawk. The bombing broke the back of the Assad's rivals.
Number 2.
The deployment of S-400 come after Turkish fighter jets shot a Russian Su-24M bomber out of the sky. It was seen as a backstabbing by Russia. President Vladimir Putin warned of serious consequences over the downed Sukhoi Su-24, which Turkey claims ignored 10 warnings to keep out of its airspace at the Syrian border. S-400 is considered to be the most powerful air defense system in the world. Each S-400 battalion is equipped with 8 launchers, a control center, and radar. Each of these 8 launchers is equipped with 32 missiles, so a single S-400 has 256 missiles on board. The S-400 uses 4 different missiles along with a multi-layered radar tracking umbrella to cover its entire performance envelope. Here are the different missiles. 1. Very long range 40 ns, 400 km. 2. Long range 48 ns, 250 km. 3. Medium range 9M96E2, 120 km. And 4. Short range 9M96E, 40 km. The S-400's radar has a range of 600 km and is capable of discriminating even objects moving on the ground, such as cars and military vehicles. Mr. Putin told Russia today there was previously no need for the deployment because no one imagined the Russian aircraft could be in danger. He added Russia would have brought S-400s to Syria a long time ago to protect its warplanes if it entertained the possibility of a traitorous backstab. After the deployment, there were not a single provocation against Russian assets.
Number 1.
Since their arrival in September, the Russians have used naval infantry to secure a key port in Tartus and the perimeter of an airfield in Latakia. Russian troops had long helped advise and train Syrian forces, but Russian special forces operating on the front, aside from a smaller number of artillery and tank units, have remained mostly out of the public eye. The troops that recently recaptured Palmyra, Syria from the Islamic State included Syrian, Iranian, and Hezbollah forces, and on Monday, Russian officials said there was another group that contributed to the victory, Russia's elite special forces, also known as Spetsnaz. Unlike the majority of U.S. special forces that are currently advising Iraqi and Syrian forces from behind the lines at the battalion and brigade levels, Russian special forces appear to be participating in combat alongside Syrian troops at the tactical level. The presence of Russian special forces and advisors on the front line has, in turn, helped Syrian troops and President Bashar al-Assad's allies consolidate gains and take ground across the country. Exactly 1 year ago, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, with Russia's help, was laying waste to the last rebel-held neighborhoods of Aleppo. The task is almost complete, with Assad firmly in control and US and NATO influence marginalized. In his comments to the press recently, Mr. Putin said Russian efforts would soon switch from the battlefield to reconstruction. He added, military cooperation has saved Syria from collapse and long-term normalization was now possible. As Mr. Putin met with Mr. Assad and his Iranian and Turkish counterparts to discuss a framework for post-conflict Syria, his role as the Middle East's most important foreign deal-breaker is secured. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this. Hit the like button if you find the video interesting, and kindly provide your feedback in the comment section. This will help us improve.